the other thing that I find so fascinating about your work, just from a disciplinary perspective, it really shakes up traditional sociological approaches to gender. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what this whole process, the transgender process, teaches us about maybe the way that we as sociologists have thought about gender and studied gender historically.
Well, I think that there's a long history in sociology of using the idea of a transgender person to study sex and gender. So I think for a long time we used to use this as a distinction between sex and gender. So we would say something like, well, sex is chromosomes and biology, and gender is everything that's cultural. So transgender people change gender, they don't change sex, right? They can't change their chromosomes or their reproductive abilities. And now I think we've gotten a lot wiser about the fact that, sex isn't something that's real or, not socially constructed. And so sex and gender are both these kinds of sociological constructs. So I don't think we would necessarily, anchor someone to their chromosomes in this particular kind of way to say this is a real identity and this is the sort of constructed identity. But that has been something I think that sociology did for quite a long time. But, I think what the experience of transgender people can kind of show us is how everybody, is socialized into a gender identity and not just a gender identity, but these kinds of behaviors of gender. And what I found most interesting in my study is traditionally, I think in sociology, there's an idea that transgender people are kind of overdoing gender, right? That they're have to be 120% male or 120% female because they're trying to show to the outside world this is real and this is valid, right? So I think of Harold Garfinkel's classic study of Agnes, this young trans woman, where he went out of his way to say she had to be more feminine than cisgender women, right? Because she was having to prove that this was something that was real for her. And I think that there's been a lot of change in that. I think we have a lot more visibility about the transgender community. There's a lot of trans people who, some of the men I interviewed would say, I'm a miserable failure at masculinity. I'm not that interested in kind of being hegemonically masculine. I don't have to be Superman. I can have a wide variety of different ways that I represent my gender. But what I found in my study was that it was people's coworkers who were really invested in trying to overdo gender. So, trans men might say, I can be whatever kind of man I want. And coworkers would be like, well, men shouldn't have earrings, or men don't cut their hair like this, or if you want to be a man, you have to wear these kinds of clothes. And so it was really cisgender people who were the most invested, I think, in policing gender and kind of keeping it going. And I think that's a really interesting finding because we often kind of look at trans people to be like, oh, this is how gender works. But really looking at how cisgender people respond to trans people, I think shows us a lot about why there's this persistence of beliefs about what men should do and what women should do.